Hello and welcome to today's workshop, interview coaching for internal opportunities. My name is James Whitcomb. I'm the candidate coach, and it is great to be with you this morning. We're going to have a really good session focusing in on what you can do to perform well in an interview when you're going for an internal role. So some of the tips and things we're going to discuss today are going to be relevant to all interviews, whether you're an internal candidate or you're going for a role with another organization. But we're also going to specifically look at what's the difference when you go for a role internally. Now, by internally, what I mean is the company that you're currently working for. What is different about going for an interview in that role? And then we're also going to talk about how you can then prepare. So what you need to do that's different for an internal role as opposed to going for a normal role. All right, I'm going to be sharing my screen a lot with you today. Those of you who have attended my workshops before will be familiar with that. So a little bit about me, just to begin with, your host, your presenter. I'm the founder and the coach of The Candidate Coach, which is the platform that we are meeting on today. But prior to being the candidate coach and still currently now, I'm also a director of a recruitment agency called Smart Recruitment. And I've been a recruiter since 2005, so getting close to 20 years now. In that time, I've conducted over 3,000 interviews, over 600 assessments, and placed well over 1,000 people into work. So a lot of experience when it comes to things like we're talking about today, interview preparation. What's going to stand out in the interview room? What do you need to do really well? A little bit of housekeeping. Now, if I do drop out for any reason today, if I have a power outage, I am coming to you live. This is not pre-recorded. So if anything happens, I'll have to jump back on. But you stay on the line. If I drop off, you stay here and I will join back on. Ask questions, whatever platform you're watching on. We're streaming it to a few different places, but I can see on my screen in front of me here any questions that pop up, and we would love to have questions from you. And also take notes. So at the end of today, you will be able to get a copy of the recording of the webinar. But when you're learning, it's really important, to remember how a message feels the first time you hear it, the first time it strikes you, because you'll hear it differently the second time around. So it's always a really good idea to take plenty of notes as we're going along. So today, we're going to start off with some big questions. First of all, should you apply? So if you see an internal role advertised, how do you know whether or not it's a good one for you to apply for? What you need to do then before, during, and after the interview to put your best foot forward, and 3 things that you should start doing right now. So you want to hang around until the end, because whether or not you're going for a role at the moment or you're just starting to think about it, I've got 3 things that you need to start doing today that are going to help you improve your chances of being really successful when you get through to that next role. So the first question you've got to ask yourself here is, when an internal position is advertised, should you apply? So it is really common, unfortunately, for a lot of people to get to the point in their career with an organization where, perhaps they're getting a little bit burnt out, perhaps they're getting a little bit bored. You might be feeling this way yourself. You might have been in your organization, let's say, for the last 5 years. And you don't hate where you work, but it's just become maybe a little bit blah. It's a bit vanilla. There's nothing exciting. So you've kind of got 2 choices, right? You can look for a new role outside of your organization, and you can look for a new role within your organization. My advice to job seekers, first and foremost, is to look internally first, because you're going to have far greater opportunity to move upwards by staying within your organization than to move sideways. So if your view is to take that next step upwards in your career, it's actually going to be easy to do so in your current organization. I'm not saying that it's impossible to do outside of your organization, but it's a smaller gap to bridge within your current organization. But what you need to be careful of, and what you want to avoid doing, is applying for too many internal jobs and applying for internal jobs that just aren't relevant, that you don't really want. And again, this extends to job seekers outside of internal roles. There's no point in applying for a job unless you really want that position. So if you see, if you're in a large organization, there might be lots of jobs advertised. There might be 100 jobs advertised at any one time. you don't want to be applying for the 15 to 20 of those, because that will be noticed and you'll just look like somebody who's desperate to change jobs. What you want to be known for is somebody who is making a targeted and selective decision to change roles, and this is why. But there's a bit of a formula here, and I'm going to share that with you now. So the first thing you need to do is to create your own key selection criteria. Now, on the Candidate Coach platform you're watching this on today, you're going to be able to download this form. So I'm going to go through it with you now, because rather than just applying or for a job or not, let's put some method behind it. Let's work out, let's have a formula, and this is a formula that I've created for you here, where you can step back. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to step back and not talk about a vacancy, and we're going to make our own selection criteria, which is going to help us determine whether or not we should apply for a job. So let's go through that now, and let's have a little bit of a look. So the first thing that we need to do is go down the bottom here of our pyramid, and we need to build out the base requirements. So what are the key things? So here we've got lists the 4 to 6 essential things that your next job must have. So these are things that are non-negotiable. So I've got a couple of examples there. The job must be at least 50% work from home. If that's a non-negotiable for you, and that's a really important part of the job, you pop that in there. Now, it might not be 50%. You might just say, hey, look, I need at least 1 day a week where I can work from home. Salary is often a big base requirement as well. So you fill this out. You put some of the base requirements here, particularly if you're going for an internal role. You might have some key requirements there. So it might be, I want to move to the finance department. That's a key requirement. And I'm not looking at a job unless it's in the finance department. Or this job needs to be, needs to be viewed as a promotion. I'm not going to consider a sideways move. It needs to be an upwards move for my career. So your base requirements here, let's list the things that are essential. And basically with the base requirements, if in a position that you're looking at doesn't match all of the base requirements, you're not going to apply for it. So straight away, we're putting up some fences. We're putting up some barriers and saying, if the job doesn't meet these base requirements, I'm moving on. I'm not going to waste my time on it. This particular job is not for me. We then move up to the nice to haves. So the nice to haves here. So we're not listing as many on the base requirements. We've got 4 to 6 things. The nice to haves, we've got 2 to 3 things that you would really like your next job to have, but are not essential. And the example I've got here is an organization that demonstrates they have a strong social conscience. Again, using work from home is an easy one. The base requirement you might have is I need to have at least 1 day a week working from home, but it'd be really nice to have at least 3. So you might list that there. Some of the other nice to haves might include the type of people you're working with, or the type of manager, or the department, or the projects, or the clients that you're going to be working on. There's lots of different things here that you can put down, but these are nice to have. So if the advertisement or the position that you're applying for internally doesn't have these things, we're not going to avoid applying for it. But if they've got them, all the better for you. And then if we move up to the very top of the pyramid, the cherry on top. So what would simply be amazing for you? So what, it's kind of like some of the dream criteria here. And that's why I've only put 2 things. But what would be 2 things that would just absolutely knock your socks off? You need to list these here. So what we do once we've completed this pyramid, if we zoom out, we've got our own selection criteria here. So this is your job selection criteria for you. So all of the roles that you're applying for, they will have their own key selection criteria. Now you've got your own selection criteria. So if the job doesn't match what you want, to move on. So we start with the 6 things on the base, the 2 or 3 nice to have, and the 1 or 2 cherry on top. And then we're able to print that out. We're able to use that. And then you can go away and look at the positions you're interested in applying for, whether it's an external role or an internal role. You can use your key selection criteria here, particularly if there's a lot of jobs that you're looking at. And again, this probably tends to be more so if you're looking to apply externally. You might have found 20 advertisements that are interesting. Well, compare those 20 with your key selection criteria and give them all a score based on your key selection criteria. criteria, and then you've got a ranking, because you're not, I would recommend you don't go and apply for 20 jobs. I recommend you go and apply for the top 4 or 5. You won't know what those 4 or 5 are unless you compare them and rank them. And our key selection criteria will certainly help you to do those things. So let's go away and do that. That's the first step, is to create our key selection criteria and then apply that to the roles. So just a quick word on your resume and your cover letter. In this session today, we're not going through a whole resume and a cover letter. We have other workshops that you can watch for that. But you really need to apply like you mean it. And so that's where it comes back again to narrowing the focus and only applying for jobs that score very highly on your key selection criteria. Don't just be submitting applications that you're putting minimal effort into. Apply like you mean it. And particularly for an internal role, you really need to focus on what you've achieved in your current job, at your current employer. What have you done in this particular workplace? Because the people who are going to be looking at your resume and then meeting you will have a greater understanding of what happens in your 4 walls. And use your cover letter in particular to really impress here. So this is a great opportunity with your cover letter to talk about some of the things, perhaps that aren't really known within the organization. So if you're applying for a role internally in a different department with different people that don't know a lot about you, in your cover letter, you can talk about some of your achievements that they're probably not aware of, or some of the projects that you've worked on, or some of the things that you've done within the organization. You want to use your cover letter there to really promote yourself and to put your best foot forward. All right, so let's talk about some of the things that we need to do before the interview. So let's say we've gone through the process, we've created our key selection criteria, we've applied for the job, and now we've been invited in for the interview. So first of all, I want to go through the basics for all interviews. What are the basics for all interviews? Well, first of all, what do we need to know? We need to know who we're meeting with and understand who they are and what they do in your organization. Are you meeting with the recruiter or the HR manager? Or the CEO, because it's going to be a very different experience with each of those people. Speak with your colleagues. For internal roles, you are very likely, if you don't know the person who's going to be interviewing you, to know somebody who does. Ask them what it's like. Look them up on LinkedIn, and then use this information at the interview. So if you're meeting with Barry, who's the head of finance, there's nothing wrong with saying in an interview, Barry, I know that Sophie's worked for you for 2 years, and I had a long chat with her about what it will be like working with you and in the finance department. Use that information to show the interviewer that you're really keen on this particular job. You also want to find out, what should you expect? It's a really broad question, but is it an individual interview? Is it a group interview? Learn a little bit more about what's going to happen so you can be best prepared. You want to try and ask, what am I going to be asked? What types of questions are you going to be asked at the interview? What interview style is it going to be? Because then you can go away and you can practice. How are you going to get there? So if you're going to another department that you don't have access to the floor, if you're going to another location, you want to be early and you want to be relaxed. And how long will the interview go for? You need to have a sense of, preparing your whole day around this. So that you're nervous, you're not stressed about getting back to your desk because you've got a meeting. But it's really important that you understand these things. What do you need to bring along to the interview? So all interviewers like a well-organized candidate. And if you don't bring everything along to the interview, it actually can reflect really poorly on you. So make sure you find that in advance. And the most important question of all, and this is really important to find out for an internal role, is what can I do to really impress at interview? So again, it's very likely that the person you're going to be meeting with, is known by other people in the organization. So do some research into the person who's going to be meeting with you. And you can then find out, well, what is this person like? What do they look for often at interviews? And what's going to, impress them? All right, let's talk about the day before the interview. Let's pretend you've now got an interview locked in internally for tomorrow. So what are some of the things that we need to do the day before the interview to make sure we're best prepared? Well, we need to first of all know how we're going to get there. So we check in, confirm our travel arrangements. We want to be really well presented for an internal interview. Even though it is internal, we don't want to be dressing down. We don't want to be looking anything other than our best. So clothes are cleaned and ironed, our shoes are polished. Everything we've been asked to bring along is printed out in advance. And we do this the day before in case we encounter any hiccups, like a printer being out of ink. If you've been asked to complete any assessments, that we've done so in advance, and practice our answers to our interview questions. Then the morning of the interview. So let's say it's today. We've woken up. We need to have breakfast, have a full stomach. It'll be good for your blood sugar levels. It will also really help to make sure that you're calm. You've got food in your stomach. Shower, shave, brush your teeth. You're fresh and clean. You're well presented. Avoid smoking unless it's something you have to have. And just give yourself plenty of time. Don't announce your arrival too early for interview, because that's a bit awkward too. But make sure that you're early. And then take along to the interview with you. Take a compendium. So you might be like, well, that's a little bit awkward. This is my workplace. But show up to the interview as a real professional. Taking a compendium with you makes you look like a really professional person, and you can take along. It's got a practical purpose as well. You've got a copy of your resume and your cover letter. Any questions that you want to ask are going to be in there as well, and any other material is written down. So a lot of what I see with this is people not doing enough preparation. For when it comes to the interview, and they think, oh, it's just my current employer. I'm not going to take things as serious as an external interview. And that's a big mistake, because there will always be other people who take it more seriously than you. All right, so let's talk about in the interview room now. What's going to happen in the interview room? And often the question here is, with internal interviews, what's the big difference? James, what's the big difference between going for an interview in my current organization and going for an interview externally? Well, the biggest difference is simply, it's a bit of a funny picture there, but it's like this. Hello, friend. I know you. That's exactly what it's like. The interviewer has already made assumptions about you. Now, this can be positive and this can be negative. So if you've been a hard worker, a good performer, and you've built up a good personal brand and whatnot in the organization, then this is great. The interviewer has positive assumptions about you. But if it's the opposite, if you've been a bit slack and you've spent the last 6 months, kind of flaking out a little bit and just doing the minimum, then the interviewer might have that assumption about you as well. You can't hide from your past. You have also made assumptions about the interviewer. So the person that you're meeting with, you have already made certain assumptions. So you've already heard, oh, okay, I'm meeting with Tony. I've heard he's like this, or I heard he's like that. The really important thing with both of these, what you assume about the interviewer and what the interviewer assumes about you, you have to let this go. You have to let this go. You have to go into the interview and perform really, really well. And if you're worried in advance about what you think they think about you, it's going to end really, really badly. So far more is known to each party. However, the biggest mistake that most applicants make for internal interviews is underselling themselves. So most candidates for internal interviews assume that because they're going for an internal interview, that even though they might not know or have met the person interviewing them, they assume that it is known what they're going to bring to the role. And this is an absolutely huge mistake. So you really, really need to sell yourself. You need to pretend that the interviewer has really not heard of you before, that the interviewer knows nothing of what you've achieved, and you need to make it really, really clear. So you need to sell the work that you've done in the organization. Highlight the achievements that you've had at this organization. Sell the impact that you've made and sell what you bring to the organization. So it is better for you to act as if the interviewer knows nothing about you. So don't skip details in terms of the achievements that you've made in your current role. Don't skip the details in terms of what projects you've worked on. Don't skip the details in terms of the impact some of your work has had in the organization. Don't be rude and speak to the interviewer like they're dumb, but don't assume that they know anything. It is best to assume that they don't know anything, so that when they leave the interview room, what you have told them is all of the good things that you've achieved, in your current role. And there's no doubt there, about that at all. There's no doubt at all about what you've achieved, what you've done, and how suitable you are for the role. Let's talk about how you can impress any interviewer. So what are some of the small things and big things that you can do to impress any interviewer? Well, the first thing is show that you've done your research. So in particular for internal roles, that involves speaking to people in your organization who are in the current position. So as I said before, if you're meeting with, was it Barry or Bruce, who's the head of finance, tell Barry that you've been speaking to people in the finance team. Let him know the level of research that you've done. You don't want the interviewer to think, oh, you're just applying for another internal role. You want the interviewer to feel, hey, this candidate is really targeted. They're really keen on this role. They've done a lot of research. They've been speaking to people. This has been going on for some time now. It's not just an overnight thing. So show that you've spoken with people in your organization about the position and you understand what doing a good job looks like. You can link your experience and education. So what you're doing at the moment, even if it's in a different department, you can find a link there, to build that bridge over to the new role. You understand the impact that position has on the organization and you understand what challenges you will face in this position. So particularly when you're going for an internal role, often the challenge is that the internal role involves either what we call a step up, so it's a promotion and there's some challenges there, or it's a sideways move to a new department and there's some challenges there. You need to let the interviewer know that you understand this, and you're not just thinking, I'm going to waltz into this new role and it's all going to be easy. Let the interviewer know. And then finally, let's talk about after the interview. So what happens after the interview, particularly for an internal role? Well, there is nothing wrong with sending a thank you email, particularly for internal roles, because if you're not successful today, you might be the candidate that comes second, and that opportunity might become available again in a short period of time. So we want to post-interview, even if we've been unsuccessful, behave in a really courteous way. So send a thank you email. If you've been asked to do something, do it immediately. So we want to follow up and be really, really responsive. If there hasn't been a timeline established for follow-up or for communication, there is nothing wrong with you getting in touch again in a couple of days' time. And if you've been unsuccessful, ask for feedback. And this is really important for internal roles. Find out where you can improve. Find out how realistic it is. Is it realistic for you to expect that you can make a move to this role in the near future? Or are you 3 to 5 years away, perhaps, and you've actually, made a wrong assessment of your own skills and ability? Particularly for internal roles, if you can get some feedback here, it's going to be really, really helpful for you. And it's going to allow you to have more of a clear and succinct view on your future within this organization. Because it might be, look, you did interview well for this role, but we've got so many people internally that we can't guarantee anything here. And look, that might lead to you leaving the organization, but it is better for you to find out now than to hang around for another 3 years, trying to find that out. All right. So to conclude today's workshop, 3 things that you can start doing today. So these are 3 things that you can start doing pretty much immediately, regardless of how suitable you are for an internal promotion or an internal move. And regardless of whether you want to start applying today, tomorrow, or next year. So the first thing is what we talked about at the start. Go back and create that key selection criteria. You need to start thinking objectively about your career, at your current organization. Kind of create your key selection criteria, then step away from it and go, okay, I want to look at myself from an outsider's point of view. How good are my skills? How good are my achievements? And what do I need to do to improve to become a leading candidate for the internal role that I want? So start doing that straight away. Create your key selection criteria today. It can change over time. You might write it today and then rewrite it again next week, but start to put something down on paper that can be a base for you. Secondly, and this is really important, start networking within your organization in the areas that you are interested in working in. You'll learn plenty yourself and your interest will be noted. So let me point it out. Let me give you 2 examples. You are wanting to get into the marketing department and you get an interview. When you turn up for the interview with Sarah, Sarah says, "Hello, Tom. Nice to meet you for the first time." Or if you turn up to the interview and says, "Hello, Tom. My name's Sarah. We've met a few times. You came to those marketing events we had. It's great to see that you've shown some interest." That second person is already on the radar. That second person has already been spending some time networking, showing interest. You're planting seeds by networking within your organization in the area that you want to move into. If you start doing those things now, so there might not be a vacancy. Let's say there is not a vacancy, and there's not going to be a vacancy for 6 to 12 months. But what you want to do is when that vacancy presents itself, you want it to have been doing a lot of networking and showing your enthusiasm for the role, for the department by the time the vacancy comes around. And the third and final thing is start compiling a list of your achievements within your organization. So what are you working on today? What achievements have you had in the last 6 months? Things do easily get forgotten, particularly if you've been with an organization for a while. You can start to forget some of the things that you've done. And achievements don't have to be employee of the year. It could just be work on an interesting AI project, for example. But start to list some of those things down now and write a little bit about them so that they're fresh of mind and you can draw on them in an interview when it comes to the future. So that's it for today's webinar. I hope that's given you some insights in how you can best prepare for your next internal interview. I'll hang around and see if we've got any questions. Do connect with me on LinkedIn, James Whitcomb. Do follow the Candidate Coach on LinkedIn as well. We'd love to have you, interacting with us on our social media channels. And I'll pause now. I'm just about to sneeze. Excuse me, and see if there's any questions. But other than that, enjoy the rest of your day. Good luck with your next internal role.